The Maya traditions even today leave many questions and still unresolved mysteries, many of which chill the soul even of people with nerves of steel. Welcome to Flip Side of History. Today we will tell you about gruesome things for us that were normal among the Mayan people. Firstly, appearance. The Maya considered squinting to be a sign of favoritism in males, so boys were specially placed into their hair with resin balls. The child, observing the object, gradually over time began to squint his eyes. Another standard of beauty was an extended skull, so newborns practically from the first day were put a special wooden cap on their head, which gradually lengthened the shape of the skull, so that the growing boy or girl was considered beautiful. The Mayans also purposely disfigured their teeth by inserting either obsidian plates or plates of nephrite into them. Sometimes the teeth were purposely shaped like the teeth of a saw. Finally, the piercings. Many images show Mayans with nose rings, pierced ears, and such. This is not really body adornment, but a sacrifice to the gods. The Maya considered the piercing of the nose, tongue, genitals, cheeks, and lips as serious sacrifice. It was believed that through the holes made, supernatural powers came into the world of the living. Games for life. It is possible that Maya were the originators of the soccer because it is not for nothing that Brazil is considered the Mecca of soccer. There was one general rule of the game. It lasted until the first ball was thrown, after which the competition stopped. With this limitation, soccer matches could go on for up to 4 days. Today, at least 3 versions of such matches are known. The first, 2 teams, possibly from the opposing tribes, played soccer where the ball was a skull covered with the skin of the defeated enemy. According to other sources, not the skull but the head. This is according to the Mayan belief symbolized the struggle of light with dark forces. The losing team as a whole was sacrificed to the gods. The second variant of soccer matches was the so-called gladiatorial fights, when captives captured in battles acted as soccer players. In this case, the losers were tied in pairs and thrown from the top of the pyramid. This tradition was adopted from the Maya by the succeeding tribes, such as the Toltecs. However, the rules were changed quite dramatically. After the match ended, the captain of the losing team cut off the head of the player who scored the ball. The interesting thing is that, over time, the tradition evolved into a more peaceful one. 2 teams of priests would go to the field and play with the rubber ball. Since the ball symbolized the sun, it was forbidden to touch it with hands or feet. It was allowed to hit the ball with the head, shoulders, and stick. The moment when the ball hit the rubber ring was considered a goal. The sacrifices. The Mayans made human sacrifices if they needed the help of the gods. The process itself varied enormously, from solitary sacrifices made within a given tribe to mass sacrifices made by the high priests in huge crowds. In order for the gods to bestow the harvest, boys were sacrificed and dropped by the priests into karst wells filled with water. It was believed that such wells served to communicate with the world of the gods, and the sacrifice went immediately to its destination. For the sake of satisfying certain requests, it was also practiced either to be buried alive or to be buried in the mountains. In the first case, the victim was placed in a high mound, sometimes leaving a small pipe through which the chosen one of the gods was given water to drink until he or she died there. In the second case, as a rule, an innocent teenager was taken far into the mountains and, after being drugged, was left in an icy cave where the victim died of the cold, curled up. That is, the very pose of the embryo suggested that such a victim would be more willingly accepted by the gods. The so-called blood soul ritual was also practiced. Specifically, an innocent young man was chosen for this purpose and was forbidden to inflict any slightest injury, not even a scratch. Then the victim, after being heavily drugged, was tied to a pole and shot either with bows or spears. And the victim was not supposed to die immediately. The Mayans believed that the blood of a dying victim sent the soul to the god. And finally, the most massive and cynic was a sacrifice at the main temple of the Maya. At first, the victim was covered with a special paint, a sacred sacrificial glaze, and a tall cap was placed on his head. After that, 4 assistants of the high priest, also covered with the same glaze, took the condemned to the top of the pyramid, where they laid him on the sacrificial altar, having separated and attached his limbs. And after that, the master of ceremonies approached the victim, opened his chest with a stone knife, ripped out his heart and handed it to the head Chilan, priest, who sprinkled the steaming blood on the statue of the god to whom the sacrifice was dedicated. The heart had to be brought to the statue while still alive, or otherwise the deity would not accept the offering. And afterwards, the breathless body was thrown down, where the rest of the priests quickly peeled off the skin, and their chief, putting the bloody ropes on himself, performed a ritual dance. But the most interesting thing is that the body of the victim could still be used for useful purposes afterwards. If the victim was an ordinary prisoner, or a girl, or just someone randomly chosen, his remains were simply burned. But if the victim was a noble and brave warrior, his body was cut up into pieces, which were eaten by the nobles and the priests themselves. The Maya believed that the blood of a brave warrior would give strength and courage to those who consumed it. In addition to individual sacrifices, the Maya also practiced collective sacrifices. For example, during the Spanish invasion, one of the tribes committed mass suicide. Despite the seeming absolute insanity, the explanation to this is quite simple. The Maya believed that communication with the gods was achieved only and solely through sacrifice, that the soul in conversation in heaven would be able to talk about problems and ask for help. So the ritual of mass suicide meant nothing less than, in modern parlance, a collective appeal to the god. Ritualistic cannibalism. It was mentioned above, but in addition to direct sacrifice, ritualistic cannibalism was also practiced, the purpose of which was to give the victim eternal remembrance and worship. For this procedure, the most worthy representative of the tribe, or a captive of noble origin, was chosen and tied to a pole. And then from the thighs, buttocks, hands of the man, women began to cut off pieces, quickly swallowing him. The victim, not being under the influence of the drug, could see and understand everything perfectly well. The most interesting thing is that the process of such, in modern world, gruesome eating did not guarantee the respect or remembrance for the victim. If before death the chosen one did not make a single sound, including even a slight sigh, only then his bones were buried with honor in the mountains or in the hollow of trees. And only then was the burial place considered sacred, and people went to it to pray to it with requests and various problems. If the unfortunate person made even one sound, after death his bones were simply broken and thrown away. The bones of those who passed a test were sometimes dealt with differently, the skull being worn on the belt, as was the thigh bone, for example. This was considered a protective amulet and talisman for the true warrior. In general, in the Mayan culture, researchers have found references to 7 different ways of sacrifice, from the above described in ritual decapitation to those which today have the comment, cannot be described, but something quite creepy and frightening. Ritual of return from the afterlife. That tradition survives today, when on the day of commemoration, the day when the souls come out of the underworld of ancestors, the remains are taken out of the graves, which relatives disguise, smear with incense, and put back in. In ancient times, the process had much more significance. For example, over time, the Maya retrieved the bones of buried relatives and loved ones, which served as an additional way to gain the support of the ancestors and the favor of the gods. Dance of Purification by Fire. This ritual was performed when unexplainable natural disasters occurred, or when tribes were plagued by disease and war. For example, during droughts, abnormal floods, unprecedented heat, or, on the contrary, cold, the whole tribe performed the ritual of purification by fire at night. Firewood was first brought to the field, set on fire and gradually burned through to the ritual dances and songs of the priests. When only glowing embers remained in the fire, they were scattered across the field with sticks, creating what was called a carpet of fire. The priest and the young men walked barefoot over the glowing embers. It was believed that such a ritual purified the soul, hardened the will, and also pleased the gods. Gods love small things. Scientists paid attention to this striking peculiarity of Mayan beliefs long ago. Archaeological excavations have shown that often the victims were if not shredded, then at least dismembered. This was done precisely for the convenience of the gods. According to the Mayan religion, the supreme deity had 4 dwarf assistants, so both the assistants and the deity were pleased that the sacrifice was offered in the separate form. Thank you for watching our video. Subscribe to Flip Side of History and leave a like.